Hello, Mike here from award-winning Joe and Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland. As you can see today, we're in St Andrews, but look at the weather. I mean, we've got an unusual weather system coming in. It's quite windy and a fair bit of rain as well, but it's going to pass, so it's kind of unusual for the time of year. It's a wee bit cold as well. I think it's about 6 degrees centigrade when we were coming up today, but okay, so I hope you're all well and safe, and thank you for joining again. Okay, so we're in front of the younger building here, part of St Andrews University, and it's a music department, and Joe was talking about it last time, and it's an Art Deco type of building. You can see in the lines it has here, but it's got Grecian elements also. Up the top you can see the classical pediment, which is that triangular part above the pillars there, and they have a music tuition here. They have rehearsal rooms, and they also have lunchtime concerts, and it's all tied in with the university. And it was opened in the 1920s by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, the mother of the present Queen, who was Scottish, so big connection there. So we're going to move on a little bit, and we're getting periods where the rain gets a bit heavier, and then times where it eases off slightly, so it's coming and going a little bit, so you'll have to excuse.
It's supposed to be the month of May. It feels like the month of November.
It does.
There's going to be some snow on the mountains this weekend, or the next few days as well.
Yeah, I'm going up to Kerrymuir later on. I've got a place up there, and it's not going to be snow up there, but not so far north, further north than that. They're saying it will be snowing, and but light snow, I would imagine. I wouldn't imagine it would be too heavy. Right. So St Andrews, ancient settlement, going way back before Christianity. It was called Kilremont, and that meant Mount of the Kings, an important place for the monarchs of Scotland and also of the bishopric. It was a great centre for religion also, and we're going to have a look at some of the more religious buildings here, but before we do so, we're going to cross over to have a look at the North Point Cafe here. You may be familiar with the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who are Kate and William. Of course, Prince William, the elder son of Prince Charles, and Kate met William here when he was a student and she was a student, and there is a cafe where they met, and people in there just sampling the atmosphere. And we had a film, I think, on Friday, which celebrated the anniversary of the royal couple and their marriage, which was 10 years ago. So it would be very appropriate that we should be standing in front of that cafe where they met. I love St Andrews, and maybe you can see in the distance there. We're going up there later on to the ancient Cathedral to tell you a bit more about that. They're very connected with the patron saint of Scotland, who is St Andrew. But of course, St Andrew is not just the patron saint of Scotland, he's patron saint of many other countries, including Greece. So there's a strong Greek element to why his remains and relics ended up here in St Andrews. Right. The buildings round about here, I don't know if Joe could maybe turn around slightly, and there is a barometer on the wall there, sunk into the wall.
And I think we can tell what the weather's going to be like today. We'll just check out the barometer.
Yeah. So there is a strange thing, and that has been there way back. This part of town near the harbour used to be the main fishing area. A lot of fisher folk stayed here.
Well, the barometer's saying fair and change. I think if it's a Scottish barometer, it would just say Dreich.
Dreich. Fantastic word.
D-R-E-I-C-H.
Yeah, great word, yeah. So we're heading down this little street. Yeah, this area was very much a focus for sea-bound people and goods to be exported out, because there was a linen industry here, textile industry, as in many small towns.
There's a lovely wee church in here, Mike.
Okay.
This is All Saints in
We'll
here.
look through there.
Wee church. I think it's
beautiful.
Episcopalian.
It's quite Italian-y, isn't it? It's got that open courtyard area.
Have a wee walk in,
Yeah.
just because we can. Very nice wee hidden away corner again. A lot of people just walk past these places, but as we're Scottish, it's easier to apologise than ask permission.
It's sweet, it's nice, it's very beautiful, and good to see the greenery and the flowers.
Lovely
we're
wee cottages.
walking down here, but if you notice the stone, this beautiful stone, some of it came from the cathedral, because when St Andrew's Cathedral went through some torrential times, really difficult times, with the religion in Scotland changing, then, and also fire damage and wind damage, which destroyed the cathedral at different points, then the locals would come and quarry the stone. They would take the stone from the cathedral and use it to build the houses. So a lot of the stone was used for that.
And I believe they're making a movie here today, Mike.
Yeah, I think so. That looks like it, definitely.
What's the movie?
It's a TV program called Karen Perry.
Karen
Perry.
Perry. And spell it. T.
Karen Perry.
Perry. Oh, okay. And which channel is it on?
It will be ITV.
ITV.
I guess, thank you.
Woo,
could see-
it's wicked down on the coast.
Not a day for an umbrella. You can see this umbrella of mine is really suffering at the moment. So I want to talk about this. I think I'm going to put this away.
Whoa, as soon as you got to
We'll
the
borrow
shore.
it, it's all worth. We've got we've got St Andrew's Castle behind me here, this building here, and this dates back to the 12th century. One Bishop Roger was responsible for building it. It was after the cathedral. The new cathedral was underway, and of course it was very high up bishops and archbishops and even cardinals that would occupy this place. But not just for religion were these people important, they were actually involved in statecraft and politics and running the country, and there were close confidence for the king also. So this is in a very strong defensive site on the edge of a cliff, which forms a natural defence. Right? Now, the frontage here is really a bit later than what is behind. This is a really 16th century. Mainly what you can see here is 16th century. There's some 15th century older building in a poorer state of repair, as you can see nearer the sea there. And there is what is called the kitchen tower and the sea tower. And in here is an ancient dungeon called the Bottle Dungeon, which is about 35 feet in the shape of a bottle with a very narrow top, which opens out at the bottom. And this used to say if people had misbehaved or done really bad things, they would be lowered down into that dungeon and there would be no way of escape. Right, but I'm going to tell you a major historical event happened here in 1546, because there were preachers who were Catholic preachers but were highly influenced by reformers. It was God who determined who would be allowed into heaven, and not really how people behaved in relation to the church. So they stirred up quite a lot of controversy towards the ruling religion in Scotland, which was the Catholic religion, and one John Knox was very, very influenced by these people. John Knox, he was a preacher, and he gave a very violent, what was called a violent sermon, 1559, right? And he gave this controversial sermon, which caused a lot of people to be against the ruling people who occupied this castle here. And the first person was James Beaton, and he had a nephew called David Beaton, and his nephew was a cardinal, and he didn't like all this stuff that was going on. And one of the preachers, who was called George Wishart, who was from the north of Scotland, and he was a Greek lecturer. He used to lecture around educational establishments connected to the church, a very clever academic man. And David Beaton didn't like what this guy was talking about in terms of Catholicism, because it was controversial. It was against Catholicism. So what he did is he had George Wishart tortured, hung and burnt at the stake in front here of this very building. And there is a marking in the roadway which actually has got GW, which are the initials of George Wishart, and that happened in 1546. But what happened after that? The Protestant lords who were against Catholicism, they attacked the castle and they lynched David Beaton. They stabbed him, and it was said that they displayed his body out of a window for the entertainment of the locals. But, you know, it would not be any of those windows there, because that part of the castle was built later on. It would be another window.
It's also said that he cut his genitals off and shoved them in his mouth.
Lots of stuff. They said that they took his body and threw it down into the bottle dungeon and preserved it in salt so that people could look at it and just see, you know, what would happen to these rigid Catholic leaders at the time. So Scotland was changing from Catholicism to Protestantism. And after the Protestant lords took this place over, John Knox came here, and at this point the regent of Scotland, and this was Mary of Guise, she called on the French fleet to come and attack the castle, which they did, and they took John Knox, and he was sent overseas. He was exiled to France and spent some time there, and that's actually where he met John Calvin. And then he came back to Scotland, and he was even more sure that he was on the right track, and he preached to the people, and the people went and attacked the cathedral. They stripped inside of it, and big changes ahead. So this was a very eventful place, and you can go and visit it today. It's St Andrew's Castle. Yeah.
And there's also mentioned that what was held in siege for about a year. It was under siege for about a year.
There was a siege, yeah.
Yeah, and the people inside were trying to tunnel out, and the people outside were trying to tunnel in, and so we've got two tunnels that meet in the middle.
Yes.
And you can actually go into the tunnels when you're here as well.
What they call counter tunnels.
Mines.
Counter mines, yeah, which went under the street, and then they dug other ones down there.
Yeah.
But this was palatial. This was very much an important place for the kings of Scotland. In fact, James III was born here, and it was taken by the English. It was taken by Edward I in the 13th century during the Scottish Wars of Independence, because it was a very strategic position where anybody that held this castle could have great power over Scotland. And it was also held by the top bishop or top cardinal in Scotland, and it was balanced against Glasgow Cathedral, which was the big power base in the west. St Andrews was the big power base in the east. So these religious leaders were very important for supporting and governing Scotland. Right.
Shall we move away from the shore?
Move away.
Let's move away from the shore.
We're going to move.
It's blowing, that's what you call it. It's blowing a hula.
And Oliver Cromwell, our friend Oliver Cromwell, during the 7th century, came here and gradually dismantled parts of the castle and used it to build a pier. This is an Inverness cape that I've got on here, and it's very good. You can keep your shoulders fairly dry because it's got a double layer there. But if the wind blows really hard, what happens is the top bit can actually blow over your head, which isn't very good. So but it's working just now. So we're heading for St Andrew's Cathedral, and this goes back to the 12th century. And there's two buildings here. There's two religious buildings. We've got an earlier one too, which was built in the 11th century, 11th to 12th century. So I love this place. This cathedral, when it was opened, the nave was about, it was about over 100 metres long. It was the longest nave in any cathedral in Europe, so you can imagine how powerful a location it was. Now this took about 100 years to build, even more than 100 years, so they started off at the east end, and if you look over here, look at the windows with the curved tops to them, and these on the left hand side are called Romanesque or Norman, which dates them to about the 12th century, and before that even that style of architecture. But if you move further over, down a bit towards the west, you can see they are pointed, and this is more like Gothic architecture. So it gives you an idea how long this took to build, because it was so long to build it that the styles of architecture changed. And of course you would have to start at the east end, where the relics of St Andrew would be held, and as time went on you would end up at the west end. Now the cathedral was dedicated in 1318 by Robert the Bruce, and it was said that he rode his horse down the nave at that very event in 1318. You have heard us talking about James V and Mary of Guise, parents of Mary Queen of Scots. Well, they were married here. It was a hugely important place, but then of course after that toxic sermon that John Knox, the Protestant reformer, gave, then the populace came here and more or less tore the inside apart, took all the rich articles from inside, furnishings were all taken and destroyed, and the windows would be destroyed as well. But look at the state of it today. It wasn't entirely people that put it into a ruin. It was very exposed because it was on a promontory just above the harbour of St Andrews, so it was going to suffer a lot of wind.
Like today.
Like today. So we're staying well away from these big tall
Keep away from them, yeah.
tall walls. And on one occasion, if you look over here, it's where the north wall was. One of the spires blew down, and at the same time it took the north wall down as well. So it was even in the early days of construction, it suffered damage and had to be rebuilt. And as you can see, that beautiful tower does still exist today.
Now, what's interesting though is that St Andrews did not survive the Reformation. Glasgow Cathedral survived, St Giles Cathedral survived, because the local populace protected their cathedrals, whereas here they actually stole the stones to make their own houses.
They didn't care. They just didn't care. And but you know, after John Knox, there was still a presence, there was still a Catholic presence, but it wasn't as powerful, obviously. And of course John Knox was around at the time of Mary Queen of Scots, who kept her Catholicism, and he was quite a threatening figure to her. And of course the fact she was a woman as well, then she was going to get a lot of grief from the likes of John Knox. But these people, like these religious reformers, I mean, they were strong. They were accused of heresy by the Catholic establishment because they believed it was ungodly, that these people were from hell. But at the same time, the style of living of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church got a bit of a bad reputation because they were quite wealthy. They had great castles. David Beaton, though, I mean, he does get a lot of bad press, Cardinal David Beaton, but he did not want to have Henry VIII's son marry Mary, Queen of Scots. So he was a very convenient, powerful figure for Mary of Guise, Mary's mother, to bring on board. And a lot of people in Scotland did believe that the Protestants were bringing England into Scotland too much as a power force. So that kind of split. But David Beaton was said to have had 10 illegitimate children and various mistresses. But then again, history is going to give people like that a really bad reputation. But I'm sure he wasn't innocent of a lot of things.
I think it was the same all over Europe, because the Catholic Church they were selling indulgences, they were having illegitimate children, had their mistresses, so I think it was the hypocrisy that was being exposed a lot by the Reformationists like Calvin and Martin Luther, and then it came much more fundamental. And this is where you get rid of the hierarchy, especially with the Presbyterian Church, where there's nobody between you and your God. Whereas the Catholic Church had that strict hierarchy. So, and every time you had to pay money, you know, so they were kind of levelers of the time. In terms, although they were Protestant fundamentalists, they were levelers. And that still is seen within the Scottish culture, that there's nobody above you.
Yes.
And there's nobody below you. You know, it's still part of that. Even though not being brought up Protestant, it pervades the society.
Yep. You maybe can hear us better because we're in a more sheltered area now.
And we can breathe.
Now, this was an Augustinian monastery going back to the 12th century, and we are in the monastic part of the building with the cloister area. The cloisters, of course, have suffered very much, but there would have been arcades here, and the monks would have been walking around, perambulating around here, and there would have been a beautiful herb garden, and people who were coming on pilgrimage, people who had made long journeys to come and visit the relics of St Andrew. They could have been quite unwell, so it was also a place for people to come and be healed. So they were quite advanced in their healing techniques and their identification of certain plants that would have healing properties. So just imagine that this open area in the middle would have been full of plants and herbs. But we'll take a little wander. And
it's also where the scribers would be, because it faces south. And so the scribers who would be scribing in the holy books would have the light.
Yeah, I think Joe was we're talking about and another time where the cloister area would be on the north, but it was always to be in the south generally because that's where the sun came in.
St Salvator's church is the only one that faces north in the whole of Scotland, I believe.
St Salvator, that's right, that's the one. Here is the chapter house here, and the canons, the top leaders in the Augustinian order would meet here and hold council here and talk the daily orders. And you can see these stone coffins today.
For those of you who've got a verge on the morbid, you can come and get your photograph taken in the grave itself.
That's right.
If you have a macabre disposition.
You've got to watch you don't fall into these things as well. You know?
You got a lot of students coming in here drinking it in winter, in the evening, and falling in here.
And notice these seats here. These would be for the canons also, to sit and discuss. It's great that they are still here. You can actually still appreciate the structure of this chapter house. And archaeologists have exposed the foundations if we're going back to when the place was being destroyed, or even into the 19th century, people wouldn't have much idea about the layout, but recent archaeology has exposed like the lines of where walls are, which would have been overgrown, so you can get a really good feel for the way it was. And it was an immense building, was St Andrew's Cathedral, huge.
Yeah.
And if you look at this tower, this is called St Rule's Tower, and we're going back to the 4th century. St Andrew, his relics were in Greece. He died in Greece, and his relics were there. And on one occasion, this chap called St Regulus, who was a bishop, a Greek bishop, this was told something in a dream that he had to take these relics to a safe place, take them on board a boat and go north. And this boat was shipwrecked or came aground here at St Andrews with the relics of St Andrew. Connection, patron saint of Scotland.
St Rule is the same word as Regulus. Regulus is the Latin name for rule.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to be haunted. Well,
The tower.
two ghostly spectres exist in here apparently.
This is quite a high tower.
And you can pay your money, you can go to the top.
I believe it's about 33 metres or something to the top. And it would have had wooden staircases originally, but today, well, in the 19th century, they wanted to make it safer and they put a stone staircase inside here. This was a beacon because St Andrews was a place of pilgrimage for many people. It had been given protection by the Pope in Rome as being a very important holy site, and this would stand proud. This is the older church which goes back to the 11th century, and very little of it remains today. They built the cathedral later on, the one that we've just been through, but this was much older. And they would see this, the pilgrims would see this from a long distance, standing proud here, a beacon, as this was their destination.
Now, one of the questions I got asked before was what happened to the relics of St Andrew? Well, actually they disappeared during the Reformation, so we have no idea where they've gone. However, in Edinburgh, there is, in the St Mary's Catholic Metropolitan Cathedral in Edinburgh, there is a new shrine to St Andrew, and some other relics were gifted to Scotland by the Pope in the late 1800s when they built the new cathedral. And so the shrine there contains new relics, or not new relics, how can you have a new relic, but different relics. So there are relics of St Andrew in Edinburgh at St Mary's Metropolitan Cathedral in Edinburgh.
And I believe, did Pope John Paul on his visit not bring an arm bone of St Andrew?
He did indeed, yeah, he brought it there. Yeah,
when
so
he had made a famous visit here in the 1980s, early 1980s, I think. Yeah. So that was quite significant. Now there's burial ground, and we might just take a wander over to this tomb over here.
We're quite well protected in the cemetery here from the wind, so it's quite okay to walk around.
Yeah.
Now, last week Mike asked a question on the Gaelic language. I think it was Eva in Switzerland who said her daughter came to St Andrews and said her daughter was disappointed that people weren't speaking Gaelic. Well, that's really not surprising because this isn't a Gaelic speaking area. Gaelic is spoken by about, I think it's about 1.2% of the country, which means about 55,000 people speak Gaelic as a first language. But St Andrews is not considered as a Gaelic speaking area. The country is officially bilingual in terms of all the documents that are produced by government. But if you want to hear Gaelic spoken every day, you have to go to the Western Isles or to the northwest of the country.
That's right, absolutely, yeah. So, Tom Morris, or Thomas Morris, he was born in St Andrews, not the guy who's actually buried here. It was actually I think, remember Tommy, he was the son here, but Tom Morris was a great figure in the 19th century who advanced golf and the creation of important golf courses, not just on the east coast of Scotland, but also in the west. And he started off as the son of a weaver. He was so keen on what was got to be his main interest, which was going to be golf in the future. So he's a legendary character, Tom Morris. But we've got a film, and I think somebody posted a comment about Tommy's honour, which is quite a significant film that has been made also. So this is a bit of a pilgrimage here for golfers.
I just got asked by my cousin, Francis, are you going to mention your birthday? Yes, I will, because I've got connections with St Andrews. My birthday is on St Andrews Day, the 30th of November.
Yes, it's so special that. It's so great, yeah.
So I'm Joseph Andrew.
Yeah.